Hey guys, today is March 31st. We are going to talk about poetic forms and devices. Um, Let me get the presentation on. Um, there are two things that we're going to discuss: the types of poetry and the types of devices that we use within poetry. The types of poetry is going to be the poetic structure, things like sonnets and odes and free verse, villanelles, and all of those random things that you've heard. You've heard those haiku. I know you studied that last year. We're going to do traditional forms with rhyme schemes and complicated meter, and we're also going to do modern types of poetry where people kind of throw the rules out the window and just do what they want to do. Um, we're also going to talk about the devices, which is um, we're going to do three different ones: meaning, sound, and structure devices. Each category adds something different to the poem, so in a different way. So we are going to discuss that. So starting out with our poetic forms. Um, Ars Poetica is the first one that we're going to talk about. It's a poem about poetry. It's about the act of writing poetry. And that's the first thing that we'll discuss. So basically, in the poem, we can discuss what techniques are used, what it feels like to write, why writing is important, what writing encompasses, and it's all about poetry. Haiku is generally two things. It is a 3 to 5 line. I think actually haiku is only three. I think it's something else when it's a 5 line, but a 3 line form of poetry with 17 syllables, and it's a 5/7/5 syllabic meter. And it's to be a true haiku, it has to talk about the natural world. Lots of haikus are written nowadays that do not follow the natural world rule. It just follows the structure rule, which it can. But to be a true Japanese haiku, you have to make reference to the natural world. An ode is my absolute favorite. I love it. It's just a way to geek out about something in a poem. You write something in celebration of something generally. The style is very lofty. They probably wrote one about socks, which is kind of ridiculous, but he waxes philosophical about socks and why they're amazing or whatever. But Ode to a Nightingale is one where he writes about the bird. So it's basically celebrating something in a poem, and I've always loved it. I don't know why. Let's see here. Let me get that. Sonnets, they're English and Italians. We're generally going to talk about the English sonnet, where the meter and the rhyme scheme is important. It's a 14-lined poem. It has a fixed rhyme scheme of iambic pentameter in English sonnets, so it's always 5 feet of stressed, unstressed, or unstressed, stressed. Um, and then we are going to attempt to write one of these. It's going to be difficult, but you guys are really great writers, so I believe in you. Free verse can be the most fun because you get to do whatever you want. You don't have a fixed rhyme scheme. You don't have a regular meter. You can choose what you would like. It's still complicated, but it doesn't necessarily have to have the structure of meter and rhyme. It doesn't have it. I mean, and the prose poem, sorry, is it looks like prose. It may even sound a little bit like prose, like it may be have a narrative quality to it, but it's going to be lyrical, it's going to be more compact, and it's going to have that thing that poetry has that lets you know that it is not, in fact, prose. So, we are going to go through the devices that we are going to find when we are studying poetry. So we're going to do structure, sound, and meaning. Our basic poetic structure. These are the nuts and bolts. A line is the sentence, basically, the fundamental unit of verse carrying meaning both horizontally across the page and vertically from one line to next. So how you phrase it, how you choose to capitalize, how you use to do anything. It's all the line is the basic unit, the sentence unit. And what you do to it can change the entire meaning of a poem. Stanza is going to be a group of lines. So when you're looking at a tercet, you're going to have 3 lines together, and that would be an entire stanza, would be the 3 lines. And that's kind of the main unit of a poem is the stanza. And then syllables, it's going to be how you put stress on your words. So a lot of times you can clap to find out whether something is hard or soft. And that's how we measure poetic feet. So when we say something is an iambic pentameter, it's going to be 5 feet, which would be a stress unstressed. And then stress, we were just talking about that. When there's a greater amount of force on a word, a part of a word. And then the unstressed is the opposite, where there's not stress. And we will go into greater detail about that. Punctuation, it's can really emphasize the mood and structure of a poem. It's going to be, for the most part, the same way as you would find it in regular speech, but they become a little bit more important in the sense that they add pauses, they add what in here it says kind of almost like a soft pause. It can be a hard stop if it's a period. And for the most part, it's going to be like prose. But when you get into a lot of modern poetry, some of them choose to do pretty crazy things, especially E. Cummings. And it's fun. But just like with jazz, you have to know the structure and the traditions of regular poetry and regular grammar in order to make it work as an improv bending of the rules. So one of the things we're going to talk about is an end stop. That's just a punctuation mark at the end of a line. A caesura is a pause in the middle of a line. So here I've got Maya Angelou's, but still, comma, like air, comma, I'll rise. And it gives that pause because you're having to stop in the middle of a line instead of saying, but still like air, I'll rise. You have that moment of a little bit of a breather, not a big one. It's just a soft pause. And a period is going to be a hard stop. It's an end of a thought, it's the end of an idea. And that's generally something that happens, at the end of a line when they do that. Enjambment is one of my favorite things. Kind of like odes. I have favorite things in poetry. Sorry. It's how you end your line. And it can be, if we're looking here at a thing, this is a John Keats poem. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but we will keep a bower quiet for us and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. If we notice right here, never is on the end instead of ending it where the sentence ends. So we end the line here with keep. So we're kind of cutting off that idea, cutting off that sentence and throwing it in the beginning of the other. And that will hey, sorry, I had to pause for a second. And my phone is talking to me. Okay. So back to enjambment. Enjambment is great because it can put emphasis on words at the end of a sentence, and it kind of draws attention to that word, but it can also it can just it adds a little something to the poem, and we'll talk about that. But here, I mean, as you notice, it's almost like it's a run-on from one line to another. So it's emphasizing these words like never, keep, asleep, whereas normally we would have this really long line, and some of those words would get lost in what we were looking at. So capitalization, for the most part, capitalization is going to follow your prose capitalization. That's what it's going to be. But when you look at poets like Emily Dickinson, she chooses to capitalize certain words within the poem itself that she finds important. So if you look at I can't speak today. 632, you've got brain, blue here, buckets and sponges. So the brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. So we have her emphasizing these specific nouns within the poem, and it just it's uniquely hers. It's what she does in a lot of her poems. And so, and other people may choose to capitalize the beginning of a line, others will not. So that is also up to the author. Capitalization generally follows the regular rules of prose, but you can see here that E. Cummings chooses to not use capitalization in any of this, and he's rarely using any punctuation either. So this is from Maggie, Amelia, and Molly and May right here. So you see these are proper nouns, not capitalized. There's not even a space here between beach and the parentheses, and the same here with the comma and the A. And you know, but it's kind of fun the way that this poem runs into each other and seems so, there's something very childlike about it. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day, and Maggie discovered a shell that sang so sweetly she couldn't remember her troubles, and then there's more. But it's cool how, just like other people talk about, like he knew the rules of poetry, but he decided to be unconventional and do it this way. So much so that when he would had his name, he was lowercase e Cummings. He That's just how he was, and he was one of my favorites growing up. So we're going to talk about sound devices. Alliteration. I'm pretty sure that you guys worked with Miss Stayer on this last year. It's one of the easiest to spot because it's at the beginning of a word and you notice the consonant repetitious sounds. So the basic ones, I mean, ones that you've heard your entire life, are things like tongue twisters. She sells seashells by the seashore. You've got the S in there. And Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Got the hard P. And then if I've got an example here from The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, you can see it in verse form. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. So it adds a nice musicality to something by changing it like that. Or not changing it, but making it have that sound. Assonance, same thing, but we are listening for vowel sounds. And this is a Robert Frost poem. I think that you guys also had to memorize this last year. And so you can tell in here where I've got the various vowels. When you just look at it, it just looks like a poem. But once you start listening to the assonance that's in this poem, he gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So you can see we've got the O here, the double E's here and here. We've got shake, mistake, we've got the Y's going on here, and then the I's and the E's up here. So he's got a lot of repetitious vowel sounds. That one of the reasons Robert Frost is so amazing is, when you start taking these poems apart, and one of the things that I want to impress upon you when you are taking these poems apart and we're looking at the meter and we're looking at the definitions and we're checking out all of the things that go into making poetry what it is, it looks simple. And then when you start to analyze what's going on in the poem, there's a lot going on. There's just a lot happening. And it goes back to the quote that we looked at yesterday, where Samuel Taylor Coleridge talked about his schoolmaster saying that he believed that poetry was harder than science because everything has its place. Choosing the correct word, choosing the correct syllable, the stress, the unstressed, the rhyme scheme, and coming up with exactly the right sentiment to capture that moment in time is harder than science. And so you may not believe that it's harder than science, and that's fine. But the idea is it's deceptively simple. That's what I have to say about that. Rhyme. Wait, did I miss one? Oh, consonants. Consonants, a repetition of similar consonant sounds. We're going to find this within the word or at the end of the word because alliteration comes at the beginning. So here we have pitter patter, pitter patter. We've got that double T. I think I like the pink kite. You've got the NK and the K. And then another Emily Dickinson poem, As Imperceptibly as Grief. The quietness distilled as twilight long begun, or nature spending with herself sequestered afternoon. We've got a lot of ends through that whole thing. So it has that, and it just goes back to poetry being music, and music, like having that connection. It's a certain musicality that we're hearing by using that. And rhyme. That means the repetition of syllables at the end of a line of poetry. So, when we look at traditional forms of poetry and some modern, but a lot of traditional forms of poetry, we have a rhyme scheme. And here we've got one of the most basic ones. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. A, B, B. And it's a nursery rhyme, and we've heard it since we were tiny, and it's just a rhyme scheme that's a musical thing to us. We hear it. So, and this comes from a digging from Seamus Heaney. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. So you've got the ow, ow, ow because of the sound and ground at the end. But it also, if you think about it, it kind of sounds like he talks about the spade sinking into the earth. It kind of has that earthy turning the like sound ground. It has music that kind of sounds like what it's talking about anyway. um Sound devices, meter. This is the stressed, unstressed, the pattern of rhythmic accents in a line of verse. um this from Theodore Retke's My Papa's Waltz. If you think about it, I'm going to clap, and I hope it's not going to be too loud in the speaker. But we romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. So I'm not clapping on chin or the or slid. It's stress. It's unstressed stress, unstressed stress, unstressed stress. It's got, so it provides a pop, 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 pop. So we romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. Now I'm doing it extremely deliberate. When you read the poem, you would not read it like that, but I'm showing you how the meter goes. And then even here from William Blake, tiger, tiger, burning bright. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. So no, I think that's opposite. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. So it's stressed, unstressed in that case. And iambic pentameter. This is William Shakespeare's very favorite. He loved writing in iambic pentameter. And I think a lot of you, or you all went to the William Shakespeare Muse on Wheels, where the upper school kids did that super fun performance. He wrote in iambic pentameter, not exclusively, but a lot of the time. So it has lines containing 5 iambic feet or 10 syllables. So if you look at some of these extremely famous lines from most of these, not all of them, some of them from sonnets, some of them are from plays. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's just got a nice music to it, Sometime too hot in the eye of heaven shines. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun, but soft what light through yonder window breaks. See, we've got that. And we are going to write some iambic pentameter. You can do it. So, meaning devices, imagery. We're talking about language in a poem representing a sensory experience. So that means you're using your 5 senses. Back. Daffodils by Williams Wordsworth. I am a Wordsworth fan. I love that man. He has a lot to say in his poems. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. So we've got some rhyme going on here, but the thing that we're focusing on is the how he's appealing to our 5 senses. We've got fluttering, dancing, daffodils. We're beside a lake, which can conjure up all kinds of, a scent, or just looking physically at it. He's wandering lonely as a cloud. Um, he's wandering, so you get that feeling of like it's not on a straight line. He's just kind of drifting, and he's floating. So wandering and floating, we've got this very sensory way of him floating around. And then he sees a crowd where I see we've got sight. And the golden daffodils, we've got an idea of the daffodils. And when you know, you can just feel the way, um, you can get a real sense of what's going on because of his descriptive language, because he's using imagery to appeal to our senses. So metaphors, you guys know what a metaphor is. We're comparing two unlike things. Ode to a Grecian urn, he says, beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. So he's comparing beauty directly to truth, even though those are two, not opposing, but they're two different things. He's telling us that they are actually similar and they are the same. And then hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. So she's saying that hope is like a bird in your heart. Although she's not saying like her hat, as I just said that. Hope is the thing with feathers. It's an actual like manifestation inside, and it's comparing it to a bird basically. A simile is a metaphor, but a metaphor is not a simile. It can be confusing, but a simile you do use like or as. So here we actually looked at this poem earlier in the year, A Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes. And he's saying a dream is it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or a crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? I cannot speak. I'm sorry. So he is directly using like or as to take those opposing things and make them the same, or compare them together. So the dream is festering like a sore. The dream is a raisin in the sun. The dream is stinks like rotten meat. I mean, none of these things are very pleasant. And then personification is when we give. I don't have my personification here. We'll just have to analyze it later because I am not going back. But it's when you give inanimate objects or abstract concepts animate or living qualities. So you can either personify animals to be like humans, or you can personify concepts or like inanimate objects like a toaster, and you give it like a quality that a person would have. And we will have to look at an example later because it's not on there. So meaning devices, also illusion. That is when we are referring to something and we're just kind of assuming that the person is going to get what we're talking about. So we might reference to a person, we might reference to an event or a literary work. In this Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost, he says, then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down today, nothing gold can stay. He says Eden, he's talking about the Garden of Eden. We've talked a lot about Greek mythology and mythology in general, but especially Greek mythology. It has been referenced since Greek mythology was a thing. It's been used in prose and poetry. People love making allusions to Greek mythology. It's everywhere, and and also the Bible. And so when you're reading a poem and you're like, that seems like something that I should know what they're talking about, look it up and you will find this hidden, like what is it? What is it when it's like an Easter egg? It's a little Easter egg just kind of put in there, and it's a nice discovery when you figure it out. And we will definitely talk about that with the poems that we're dissecting. Symbolism, we've talked about that. One of my favorites that you guys have ever talked about was when you talked about the van representing something in what was that book we read? Rules. This where it basically an object or action is going to stand for something besides itself. So, in this and from As You Like It, Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. So the stage equals the world that we live in. It's just he's talking about it in reference to a poem. I mean, a play. But he's talking about the world, and then he's talking about the players. Those are just human beings. That's just you and me in the world doing what we do, and he just makes it sound super cool because he's Shakespeare. And a paradox. Paradoxes are super fun. A situation or phrase that appears to be contradictory, but it has some measure of truth. Um, the poem that we are going to talk about tomorrow, you will find paradox in it, and I just love it. Example from My Heart Leaps Up by William Wordsworth. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So it was when my life began. So it is now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The child is the father of the man. I mean, how is the child the father of the man? That kind of makes no sense. But it really does, because everything that happens when we're children goes on to inform us as who we are as adults. So he is saying that who we are as children, what happens when we're children, and maintaining that thread of being a child even when we're older is kind of like it's kind of in charge of us. You know what I mean? It kind of makes us who we are. So even though it seems like that doesn't make a lot of sense and it seems like it's two opposing things, it's actually kind of truthful and insightful. I love Wordsworth. I'm telling you, the man is a genius. Was a genius. He long ago. So your homework is that oh no, go back. Is that you're gonna write a poem. Yay! You guys are amazing writers and I can't wait. I want you to write a poem about reading, just like something, like if you need to reread David McCord, sorry, David McCord's poem Books Fall Open. Oh, you can use it as inspiration to write your poem about reading. Or you can use Afternoon of a Toad, which is you don't do that last night? Yes, you did that last night. Sorry, the days run into each other here in distance learning. So you can use Afternoon of a Toad as inspiration, and you choose your animal and describe their environment, and use a lot of imagery. We just talked about imagery. You can use a lot. You can use rhyme. You can do whatever you want. You can choose any form, any poetic device, similes, metaphors, imagery, illusions. It is your. I want you to have as much fun with this as possible, because poetry is so fun. It's really a multifaceted thing. You get to write about something as simple as a toad in the muck and make it sound beautiful and relevant and important, and use words that you would not normally use in regular language because your friends would be like, "Why are you pulling out that 25-cent word?" So you can write a poem. And in doing that, we're going to go to Panthernet to check out the Writer's Ink guidelines for writing poetry. Now, these are not guidelines like you have to do this. This just might help you in the process of writing a poem. I know you've written poems before, but we're just going to go over it because practice makes perfect, right? So it's going to be in the handout section. And these are the works cited. It will never leave you guys. You have to know the works cited. I'm just being silly. All right, let me get out of this. And we are going to go over here to Panthernet. And when we go into topics where all of our lovely information is, and we go here, Introduction to Poetry, Week 1, and we scroll down to we've talked about our learning log, and now we're talking about guidelines for writing poetry. This is from Writer's Ink. I'm telling you, you guys, we're going to have to get you a Writer's Ink next year. It's just the most magical book. So this is just like talked about the writing process, the pre-writing and the drafting and the why can't I use the word revising and the editing and then the publishing, right? This is similar, almost the same. Pre-writing, choosing a topic. The first thing you're going to do is figure out what you're going to write about. You can decide that you're going to write about something big and lofty, like I want to write about love, or you can decide that I'm just going to write a poem about roller skating. Like it doesn't have to be you pick a topic. It can be as lofty a goal as you want or as minuscule a goal as you want, okay? And reading poetry inspires poetry. Not in a plagiaristic kind of way, not in a way where you're like, I am going to copy everything that I just read about this guy, but you may like the form they're using. You may like the certain line where they're talking about a concept and say, oh, I want to use that concept in my poem. Or you just may think it's super fun that they're writing a nature poem. Let's write a nature poem or whatever. Reading poetry inspires poetry. Reading books inspires prose. Period. It just does. It's like the number one thing that writers do besides write is they read. They go together. So, and if you want to look, it says a great place to start is poets.org. It's where I get a lot of poetry. Granted, you have to understand that some of the poetry are not, some of them is not meant for kids. So be aware when you're there. This says Essentials of Life checklist. You guys don't have that, but it's basically talking about things that can be topics, basic life things. A list of memories. You can, something that's happened in your life, whether it's a wonderful Christmas morning or a trip that your family has been on in the past. We've talked about this. Your life is fodder for writing. Even being someone who's 10 years old, you've had a number of things that have happened to you, either small or large, and you can turn that into something that you want to write about. Whether it's happy or sad, it doesn't matter. You can decide to write about a mood that you are in. If you are feeling bad, you can write about something where you feel bad. I mean, it's fine. It's to capture a feeling. If we want to capture a feeling of excitement or sadness or betrayal or whatever, you can choose to do that and use that mood to write your poem. It's all pre-writing stuff, okay? Oh, we're still on that, sorry. You're going to gather some details, okay? And this can be a very quick process. You may already have your topic, and then you're going to come across with some details. If you have words that you want to use, if it talks about a sensory chart, you can start pulling those imagery ideas by using the five senses and make a chart for the things that you want to mention, that you might want to have appear in your poem, okay? And then choosing a form. You can decide that you're going to do a free verse poem. You can decide that you're going to do rhyming couplets. You can decide that you were going to figure out a villanelle and write a villanelle. It's kind of difficult, but you could do it. You could decide to tackle it because that's just fun. So you can do that, or it says you can just start writing. Okay. Sometimes sitting down and writing something that you want to write is just sitting down and writing something that you want to write. And you can just draft it. And then after you draft it, we go back into cutting it up, putting some enjambment, putting some periods and commas, or capitalizing, or whatever we want to do, or changing a word because it doesn't exactly do what we want it to do. The main thing is get it out and then revise, okay? Because sometimes we just want the muse to come and visit us, okay? And that comes to the drafting part. Um, it talks about turning on the playful part of your brain. Be, have fun with this. This should not be like, oh, she's making us write a poem. You guys have done this before. That's what you do in Miss Stayer's class. So use this as an opportunity to have fun. I'm not asking you to diagram sentences. I'm asking you to write about something that you want to write about. Okay. And I'm giving you a little bit of guidelines, but right now I want you to just sit down and make it yours. So the revising talks about improving your poem. So after you get all that first stuff out and you want to go through and circle the strong parts, the action verbs, and be like, I really like these. I want to make sure they stay. Or if you see something and you're like, that just doesn't sound right, or I'm too wordy here. It doesn't sound like a poem. It sounds more like prose, and you want to eliminate that. We want to use strong verbs. We want to use crazy words that we don't normally use. Like that's when the revising thing comes into play, and you can kind of switch things around. And then it says here, if you're doing a traditional poem, you can use a dictionary and a thesaurus to find, if you're trying to get that rhythm down and you're like, cat doesn't work because it's a one syllable word, but feline works. And, like you take and you have to analyze what's going to work for you in that poem and make a substitution that's going to make it sound great and still add to the meaning of your poem. And then polishing your poem, it's funny to read it, Get a parent, get a brother, a sister, hopefully someone older than you. Get a grandmother, anyone that's around you. Get a friend if you feel comfortable showing it to your friends. Get them to look at it and say, like, what do you think about this? Be nice, give me constructive criticism. But one of the great things that you do when you're in college is do a writer's workshop. It was one of the most amazing things I ever did in school. People would pass their poems around. You would read it, and you would have to stay completely silent, and everyone would tell you what they thought about your poem. And it would be constructive things like, I like the line you used here. I really like this word. I think that this is a great concept. And then they would say, it's a little bit confusing in line 3. Like, I don't quite understand what the speaker is doing. How can you change that in order to follow through with what you're trying to do with the rest of the poem? And it's good because you learn not only about revision, but taking criticism. It's very important in writing to learn to take criticism because sometimes the thing that we see is not what gets out on the paper exactly like we want. We may have this whole story going on in our brain or this whole idea going on in our brain, but if we don't put it out exactly the way somebody else can see that, you have to revise and you have to understand that if you're putting it out there for a speaker, not a speaker, sorry, you're putting it out there for a reader to read, which we're doing in this case, in this class, um, we want criticism. We want someone to say, you know what, I don't get that. I need you to change that so I understand what you're trying to say. And it's a very, very good process. A good is not the right word. It's a very constructive process for you as a person, for real. Like, it's the greatest thing that I ever did by doing that workshop. So, long way to say, revising is so important and letting other people read it and taking some of their advice, if it's good advice. I mean, you can pick and choose what you decide to do. Just be open to it. And then publishing, that's sharing your poem, which you're going to do with me. Or if you want to, you can enter them into contests and things. But anyway, this is just some ideas. If you get stuck and you're like, hey, what should I do? It's just there to help. Okay. So that is all for today. I hope that you guys are getting in the swing of distance learning. After this first week of like real distance learning, where we have lectures and we have homework and all of that stuff, I do want feedback from you guys. I know that you have a lot going on, and I don't want to pile on you a whole bunch of work because I know right now what we're doing in school is insane. It's insane that we're not together. It's insane that we're at home and we're not in our usual routine, and the world is just kind of upside down right now. I get it, and trust me, I'm feeling it too. So let's get through this week and we can talk about whether or not you think you guys have too much work from me. You have just enough. But I want you to understand that it's very important for us to continue to learn at home. So it may seem like a lot of work, but this would be things that we were doing at school. So we're just having to take time at home to do them. So I want to hear from you, though. I want to know at the end of the week whether or not this stuff has been a positive way to receive information to me, if it's helpful, if you're learning things. I want to know all these things. Okay. Um, but don't send me an email right now because let's wait. End of the week. Let's get through our week. Okay. So I hope everyone is great. And as always, you are welcome to email me, send me a message, whatever's easiest. I'm here. Okay. So that is all for today, and I will talk to you soon.